Okay, teachers, picture this. You ask this wonderful, great question to get students thinking, and the response you get from the student that raises their eager little hand is off. What do you do now? Do you choose a different student? Maybe correct the student? Why or why not? In this video, I will share key ideas from current research about scaffolding conversation that helps build students' language and comprehension. I am Dr. Jen Schlaber with Lasting Literacy Solutions. I use my 20+ years in education to help educators and families know more about literacy learning, because when we know more, we can do better. So the article that I'm speaking about today is authored by Zucker, Cabell, O, and Wang from the University of Texas and Florida State. These researchers and authors have compiled their research for this practical article in the Reading Teacher with the title, Asking Questions is Just the First Step, using upward and downward scaffolding. Are you wondering what is meant by upward and downward scaffolding? I promise I'll get there and demonstrate for you towards the end of the video. So the purposes of their research were to determine ways young students, and they primarily worked with pre-K through second grade, how young students are impacted by classroom conversation. The other purpose of multiple studies that they've done has been to determine what teachers can do, specific moves that teachers can make to most effectively facilitate conversation that impacts students most. So I'm going to talk about 4 major findings that are shared in their article. The first is that there's been significant research that has shown the importance of open-ended questions, and this is probably nothing new to you. But questions that are open-ended are ones that require more than a yes or no answer. They require more than a single word response. Unfortunately, on average, 52% of questions teachers asked are actually closed questions. And yet, even a small number, like even between 1 and 5 open-ended questions throughout your day as a teacher can greatly enhance students' vocabulary development. Okay, so the second major finding is that multiple turn conversations, beginning with open-ended questions, have a significant impact on students' language development, their critical thinking, and their comprehension. So multiple turn means back and forth with the same student. Okay, and they describe a 5-step process that I'm going to explain to you and demonstrate. So what's interesting with this is that the conversation does not have to be long, because we know what happens when we have really long conversations sometimes as teachers. But the conversation doesn't have to be long. It's not about the length of the conversation. It's about the interactions that happen between you and your student. Okay, so the third major finding is that this 5-step approach that they've developed is effective. It does boost students' language development, their vocabulary, their comprehension. So the first step of this 5-step process, which is also in the handout that's linked in below the video here. The first step is that the teacher asks an open-ended question. Next step, the student responds. Okay, the third step, the teacher responds to that same student with either upward or downward scaffolding. That same student responds to your scaffolding as a teacher. And then finally, the 5th step, the teacher expands that topic not only for that student but for the entire class, okay, with a brief statement. I'm going to demonstrate that for you in just a few minutes. So the last major finding, the 4th major finding that was discussed in this article, is that the greatest challenge for teachers is determining the appropriate upward or downward scaffolding to match that student's response. So just over half of teachers in their studies have made the appropriate instructional move. So you may be wondering, why just half? Well, there's a number of different reasons. And if we know them, we can kind of be aware of what we need to do to prevent these. The first thing that's challenging about determining the right scaffolding is that the teacher really has to listen carefully to that student's response. So the teacher really has to have some pretty good management skills so that they can hear and really attend to that one single student's response and be able to make the next instructional move. The next thing is that the teacher has to really be able to think on her feet. or his feet. It happens quickly, these conversations. The next is that a teacher really needs the opportunity to reflect on her or his own teaching, which is most effective with video recordings of the teacher's own teaching. And then finally, teachers need to be good students of their students. They really have to know their students well to be able to figure out and think on their feet about the kind of scaffolding that their students need. So why do these findings matter? Well, language development, including vocabulary and critical thinking, are essential for reading and listening comprehension. And language development overall is essential or impacts all learning. So the better we get our academic conversations with our kids going, the better that they'll succeed as learners in all content areas. Who is this relevant for? Well, it's really relevant for teachers of all ages. Although the researchers and authors of this article have focused their work with very, very young students, as I said, pre-K through about second grade, these instructional moves are talked about in research for all ages, all the way through high school and college even. So of course, all teachers and then also administrators that are evaluating teachers could really use this information to help them understand how to support young teachers, and then instructional coaches who guide teachers. So what can teachers do then with these findings? This is where we're going to get to the nitty-gritty here. So, okay, remember at the beginning of the video, a student responds to your very well-worded open-ended question, and the student's response is off. So this is your opportunity to use some downward scaffolding. So the first thing you can do is reduce the choices. So that means changing your open-ended question, like a how or why question, to a closed question. So giving them a choice, maybe even saying, okay, well, could it be this or this? Now you do that, the child responds with the wrong this. Okay, so now what? You just abandon and call on somebody else. No. Instead, you reduce the verbal demand of your question. Simplify your question. You may even provide a blank for that student to fill in. Okay, you really want them to continue to engage in the conversation. Okay, they still are having a hard time. They look at you and just blink, blink, blink. Okay. Next thing, model a simple, clear answer for them. Give them the language that they need, but then ask them to repeat that back to you. Okay, so what might this sound like? Here's an example right from the article and right from their study of a kindergarten teacher using downward scaffolding in a unit that she's doing on plants with her kindergartners. So the teacher says, remember why plants need sunlight? Isabella, why do plants need the sun? And Isabella says, because it's bright. Okay. Do plants need sun for energy or water? See the downward scaffolding. She's giving a choice. Isabella has no response. Okay, so the teacher says, all right, now remember, the sun is the main source of energy, says Isabella. Outstanding. Right, the plant turns the sunlight into energy, almost like sugar. Okay, so the teacher brings that conversation back together, makes sure everybody's on the same page. All right, so now let's look at upward scaffolding. We tend to, if we get the answer that we have in our heads, okay, as teachers, we tend to just move on. Where that student that gave the right answer, okay, or something along the right lines, could be challenged and have their language developed more if we do some upward scaffolding. So let's think about how that goes. So the student's response is on, meaning they're on the right track. What we can do is ask that same student to explain his or her reasoning. We can probe for like cause and effect. Like, why do you think that's right? We could ask for evidence or details. Maybe that came from a book that we've read with them. Another thing we can do is ask that student to make a generalization or identify a pattern, trend, or make a prediction. These are all ways to scaffold up, constantly getting more intense, okay? It's from less intense to more intense. So I'm gonna, again, read the article, the excerpt from the article, demonstrating this. Again, kindergarten, okay? So the teacher says, oh, how do seeds travel? And little Carlos says, wind. Oh, wonderful, by wind. And how else can they travel? Carlos, water. Oh, wow. Carlos, that was talked about in the article. Nice job. Yes, they can travel by wind and water. Now, what do you think happens when they get to another place? Carlos has to think further on. I think they start to grow. Well, yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it? They've got what they need, then they can start to grow. Amazing. Okay, so again, our goal is to, with one student's response, interact with that same student having 5 turns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So will these evidence-based practices of upward and downward scaffolding find their way into your classroom this week? Perhaps you could try them with a teacher friend of yours. Share this video or the helpful handout of article excerpts linked below, and stay tuned for a future Texts-4-Teachers video on my YouTube channel, or check out my Lasting Literacy Solutions webpage.